Hello and welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David begins a series focused on our capital campaign, which takes a look at the faithfulness of our generations. Let's listen.
Well, about a week and a half ago, it snowed, and I was walking along campus and thought, oh, it's so pretty. So I took a picture that I wanted to show you, because our campus can just be really, really beautiful when it's all white and all snow-covered. And then exactly a week later, I was walking in the same spot, and it was 70 degrees. 70 degrees. And I thought to myself, wait, we just went from snow to this bright sun. And, I'm thinking there's no sweatshirt needed. It's warm. And I thought to myself, yeah, this is North Carolina, isn't it? This is North Carolina, where it is not winter anymore, but spring has not truly begun. I mean, I think of even this past week, it's 70 degrees on Wednesday. And I looked at my phone this morning. It says, feels like 19. I thought, oh, my goodness. But okay, here we are. We're in the ups and the downs because we are really in a season of transition right now. I mean, a transition is going from experiencing one thing to then going to experience something new. I mean, transitions happen all the time. When you go from middle to high school, that's a transition. When you move to a new city, when you start a new job. Now, all of those are big transitions. But we have little transitions that happen all the time throughout our day. Now, I want to think about one that happens every single Sunday when you come to church. You may not be fully aware that a transition happens, but it does. When you come to worship, you leave behind the ordinary and you enter into the sacred. That's truly what's happening when you come to church, when you walk through those doors or when you turn on streaming online to be a part of this worship service. And to enter into the sacred requires a transition of one's heart. Now, this transition can be tricky because we're only here for an hour. And so when you come here, chances are your mind is still occupied by things that you are going to do later on or things that are already happening in your life that are kind of causing you worry. Like when you sit down in this pew, you're not automatically ready to worship yet. You're probably thinking about your grocery list for when you're going to go to Harris Teeter or Publix right after this service. Or you're thinking about a job at work that you need to do, a project, or something that's just kind of creating more space on your mind. But for 1 hour, we're asked to mentally set aside all of that and embrace an atmosphere of praise and of worship. Yes, this is the transition that is asked of us. Now, when you engage in authentic worship of God, this becomes sacred space. To help us explore this topic, we are going to read a short psalm. It's Psalm 100, and it was written to help ancient Israel come into a place of worship. Now, by following these instructions that are in this psalm, I think we will be better equipped to make that transition into worship ourselves. Now, Psalm 100 is also an action-oriented psalm. It's only 5 verses long. It's very short. But in those 5 verses, you are going to see 7 actions that are asked of you to help you make that transition into worship. So it's time to stretch out now. I mean, we've already danced, but we got to stretch because we are going to be active today. These are action words. So you ready? Let's begin. Here's the first 2 verses. The psalmist says, "Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs." So here are the first 3 actions that we're being asked to do. Shout, worship, and come. First thing I want you to notice about this psalm is it's an invitation to come to a place of worship. Come before God with joyful songs. Now, some of you have physically come to worship. You are sitting in this space right now. Others are watching online, but this invitation is for you as well. Because we are not so much asked to come to a specific place It's much more coming to a way of being. We are to come and worship God in our hearts. Now, for that to happen, in worship, we must remember that we are not the stars of the show, right? It is not about us. Worship is about God. So when we come to this place and we try to prepare our hearts for worship, what often happens is our thoughts are still focused on ourselves. It's focused on our needs, our worries, our desires, the things happening in our lives. But the transition that takes place involves giving over more and more of the space in our minds and the dwelling in our hearts to God, because God is the star of the show. So worship is an invitation to a new way of being. But the second thing I want you to notice is about the attitude that God asks from us when we come into a place of worship. Shout for joy to the Lord, right? Worship the Lord with gladness. When there is an authentic connection with God, joy and gladness become then the natural responses. Those are the emotions that bubble up from us when we realize that we're in the very presence of God. I mean, when you are gripped by the divine presence, the loving power of God should lead you to a place of deep gladness. Now, during the week, when you're outside of these walls, you're going to experience a lot of negativity. You'll experience a lot of thanklessness, a lot of worry, but not here. In worship, we are reoriented to what is true. And what is true is that God is in control and that God is leading and guiding your life into places of love and purpose. In many ways, worship, what we do here on Sunday mornings, worship is about celebration, right? It is the celebratory response to what God has done in the past, to what God is doing right now in your life, and to what God promises to one day do in the future. So we shout, we worship, and we come. But there are more actions that are being asked of us. Let's go to the next verse. Know that the Lord is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people, the sheep of His pasture. So our fourth action word is to know. Now, the word know can be translated acknowledge, which I think is helpful here in this context. We are to acknowledge that God is the one who made us. We did not create ourselves. And because of that, we are God's people. We are sheep of God's pasture. In essence, this is a statement of identity. Who are you? I mean, that question can be answered in many different ways, can't it? When I think about who I am, I think, well, okay, I'm a son, and I'm a father, and I'm a husband, and a pastor, and an athlete, and a Christ follower, and a neighbor, and a friend. All of these things are parts of my identity, and all of them are true, and all of them are accurate, but none of them are my primary identity. Now, who am I? I am God's. It is God who made us. We belong to God. Author Brené Brown, who you may be familiar with, has a wonderful definition of belonging. Here's how she puts it. Belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes for belonging, but often barriers to it. She says something that I think is very true. All of us long to belong to something that is larger than just us as individuals, that's bigger than just my life or your life. And we're not going to get there by simply seeking approval from others or by running to the first group that accepts us. We get there by understanding that we are God's and that God is creating and crafting a story of our lives that each of us get to play a part in. Yes, we belong to God. And that means that you are part of God's magnificent story for your life. And your part in God's story is going to look different from the person who's sitting next to you today, but is no less important. So as Christians, to know God, to acknowledge who God is to acknowledge then who we are as well. Well, we have a couple more actions. Here is verse 4. The psalmist says, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name." Are you sensing a recurring theme here? I bet you are. When we enter a place of worship, both physically and mentally, we do so with praise and with thanksgiving. So what is one thing that you are thankful for today that God has done in your life? When I think about that question, I'm thankful for this wonderful congregation that I get to be a part of, that we get to worship together week in and week out. I'm thankful for that. But I'm also thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my health. The list can go on and on when we think about thankfulness. But the key is to remember that it's actually God. God is responsible for all of these things. And to go to God specifically to say, thank you. Thank you for giving this, for providing this in my life. In a couple of short verses, we have been given 7 actions to help us transition into a place of worship. And all of these words speak to the attitude that we are to bring when we come to church, as we recognize that this is God's holy place, and as we seek to set all of our attention and our focus upon God. Now, the psalmist, in this last verse, he concludes with the reason why we are doing this in the first place. The reason why we come to worship. Here's what the psalmist says. "For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." Yes, we come to God in praise and worship because God is faithful to us. And that faithfulness is not just for us, but it's a gift that God has given to the generation before us. It's a gift that God will give to the generation that comes after us. And today it's a gift that we get to experience. When we recognize God's faithfulness to us and then respond with praise and worship and adoration, that is what we do when we gather on Sunday mornings. Now, as I think about that, in the specific context that we find ourselves in, here at Unity, I recognize that there have been a lot of generations here at Unity. So allow me to indulge you just for a second in a history lesson about this church. Unity was created in 1764 by a group of Scotch-Irish settlers, pioneers, led by John Beatty of Beatty's Ford. And much of Unity's history can still be found today in this little document. This little document is called "The Broad Axe and the Forge, a Narrative of Unity Church Neighborhood," and it was published in 1897. So in 1897, a group of people got together and they said, we're going to write down the history of Unity up unto that point. And it is absolutely fascinating. Allow me to share with you just a couple of nuggets from this history. So for example, the session minutes indicate that there was a major disagreement in 1834. And the major disagreement was whether to allow dancing inside the homes of congregation members. There was a rumor that the pastor was allowing dancing in his home, and when he was confronted, he resigned in disgrace and then left the church because he was, in fact, allowing dancing to happen in his house. And this comes just on the heels of our sock hop. Oh my goodness, how times have changed. Another nugget for you. Alexander Brevard was an elder of Unity for 30 years. He married the daughter of John Davidson, and John was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Robert Hall Morrison was the very first president of Davidson College. And when he was done at Davidson, he came to be the pastor here. And he served as pastor here for 35 years. here's a quote from the history that I just had to read verbatim. The history says, from 1830 to 1840, Unity was at the fullness of her splendor. The late judgeship counted more than 40 carriages that came regularly to the church, making no mention of gigs and smaller conveyances. I love that when they think of a time that Unity was really alive and really thriving, they point and say, look, there's 40 carriages. There's 40 carriages out there. That shows you what's happening here at this church. It makes me wonder, if they were alive today, what would they think of us struggling with our parking, with just our 88 spots? I mean, how times have changed. Now, allow me to share you just one more story from this history. It had me absolutely cracking up this week, and I'm going to read it from the historian's words. He writes, "It was hardly possible for any congregation to observe a profounder reverence than that of Unity. Only once it is remembered that the solemnity was broken and the sermon brought to a sudden close. John Knox, the presenter, had risen to line our hymn when a hornet, without provocation, stung him on the nose. With the stoicism of his great Scotch prototype, he gave no wincing of pain, but gently brushed the aggressive insect from his face. His hair, however, was red, and the afflicted member began to take on the same hue, and swell out of all proportion. There was excitement bordering on irreverence. To hide their mirth, mothers twisted the ears of tittering offspring. Austere elders shook the pews with suppressed laughter, and the minister considerately pronounced the benediction. So be on the lookout for bees and hornets. If you see any, let us know, because we don't want to get stung, and I certainly don't want any excitement that is bordering on irreverence. We can't have that. Can't have that in this church. Yes, there has been a lot of history right here in this church, on this space. I mean, even today, you can walk through the cemetery and see graves that go back to the Revolutionary War. There's a history of faithfulness through this congregation. For generations, Christians have come to worship God here. They have entered God's gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. I mean, decade after decade, Christians have chosen to gather, to support one another through the ups and downs of this life that we live. They have come to do exactly what you're doing today, to listen to God's word, to seek to find out how to apply it to their lives today, just like we do each and every Sunday here. I mean, do you know how many Sundays there have been since 1764? 13,572. That's how many Sundays people have come and gathered on this very spot in North Carolina to worship God together. You see, faithfulness is not about doing something once. No, faithfulness is doing something over and over again to show that you can really be counted on. As the Christians of this age that we live in, we are responsible for continuing to live in faithfulness. So allow me to share with you just one more verse from Psalm 78 that speaks to us about this type of faithfulness. The psalmist says, "We will not hide God's deeds from our descendants. We will tell the next generation of the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done." This is our responsibility, to tell the next generation of the praiseworthy deeds of God. When we have come to know God personally, when we have experienced the work of God in our lives, of God's power and wonders, we then have the responsibility to share that with those who have not yet experienced that to the next generation. So this theme of faithfulness, this is one of the themes of this capital campaign that we are embarking on today. Now, if you are a visitor, feel free to ignore this next part of the sermon, okay? This is not for you, but we're just glad that you're here today. But if you call Unity home, if this is your community of faith, then please join us as we invest in the next generation of Unity. Through this capital campaign, what we're doing is we are investing in Unity's ability to be strong for the coming decades. I mean, countless generations did what was necessary in the church before us to help Unity thrive. And now it is our turn. And so we get the incredible opportunity to strengthen this congregation so that Unity will continue to thrive in the next generation. I hope you'll join us by turning in a commitment card sometime throughout this capital campaign. Now, we've got a couple of details about what that looks like that I want to share with you. The first is that this is a 2-year campaign. So we're hoping to collect gifts over the course of 2 years. And we are seeking to raise $950,000 to strengthen this congregation. Now, those funds will do a couple of things. It will eliminate the debt that this church has. This church has about $400,000 left on the loan it took out to build this beautiful sanctuary and fellowship hall. And we'd like to live debt-free once and for all. It would also expand our parking. It would establish a legacy fund that would continue to take care of these wonderful facilities. It would renovate the children and youth center and the playground, and would remove the old chapel and the old offices. Now, I want to emphasize that last sentence there. No gift is too big or too small. If we are going to accomplish these dreams, it is going to take all of us. And so I strongly desire for each one of us to participate in this campaign, no matter the size of gift that you choose to give. Let us build upon the faithfulness of those who have come before us. Amen.
If you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook. This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.